Hey guys, tonight we dive into the shadowy underbelly of ancient Rome, where the cries of newborns echo through narrow alleys, left to fate in a world that blends grandeur with grim choices. You trudge along cobblestone paths, the air thick with the scent of olive oil lamps flickering against graffiti-scrawled walls, as a tiny bundle stirs in the dim light abandoned, exposed to whatever passerby might claim it. Imagine surviving the opulent forums only to face this raw reality check. In Rome, not every birth meant a welcome. And you probably won't survive this tale without questioning your own cozy bedtime setup. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You wander deeper into the labyrinth of Roman streets, where the empire's pulse beats not just in marble temples or bustling markets, but in the quiet, forgotten corners where life and death decisions play out under the moon's indifferent gaze. The alleys twist like veins through the city's body, narrow and cluttered with the detritus of daily existence. Broken pottery shards crunch under your sandals, while distant echoes of laughter from a nearby taberna mix with the low rumble of carts hauling goods through the night. These aren't the grand avenues lined with statues of emperors. No, these are the vicus, the back streets where the lower classes huddle in insulae apartments, and where the elite's secrets spill out from their domus thresholds. You pause at a corner, inhaling the mingled aromas of baking bread from a nearby furnace, and the sharper tang of waste dumped carelessly from upper windowsrooms' version of urban recycling. I suppose, though, you'd probably prefer our modern trash bins over dodging chamber pots. As you navigate this nocturnal maze, the chilling practice of newborn exposure begins to unfold before you, a custom woven into the fabric of Roman social life. Picture it, a family, perhaps from a modest household, emerges from their home after a difficult birth, carrying a swaddled infant to an alley's edge. They place the tiny form on a makeshift pile of rags or against a cold stone wall, then slip away into the shadows, hearts heavy but resolved. This isn't some rare horror story. It's a mainstream historical fact that the paterfamilias, the head of the household, held absolute power over his children's fate, deciding whether to raise them or expose them shortly after birth. It's like being the ultimate family CEO. But with life or death veto, no boardroom drama compares to that. You lean closer to one such bundle, the infant's soft whimpers cutting through the night's hush, its tiny fists clenching against the chill. The practice, known as expositio, wasn't always meant to kill. Often, it was a calculated risk, hoping a kind stranger, or more likely, someone seeking free labor, would scoop up the child for adoption or enslavement. But in these alleys, survival odds were slim, with wild dogs prowling or the elements taking their toll. Historians still argue whether this was more prevalent among the poor due to economic pressures, or if even the elite resorted to it to preserve bloodlines and avoid scandals. You can't help but chuckle softly at the Iron, builder of aqueducts and conqueror of nations, yet relying on alleyway roulette for population control. Modern parenting apps would have a field day here. Swipe left to expose. The streets come alive with subtle movements as you continue your stroll. A cloaked figure darts past, perhaps a midwife returning from a delivery, her basket empty now. The alleys serve as the city's unspoken confessionals, where social identities clash with harsh realities. Drawing from the ways Roman houses shaped who belonged, you recall how the domus wasn't just a shelter but a statement of status. Its atrium a stage for family rituals that either included or excluded. A quirky tidbit emerges in your mind. Some exposures happened near the column lactaria, a spot in the forum holatorium where milk was distributed, turning a welfare point into a bizarre baby drop-off zone like an ancient lost and found. But for humans, you smirk at the thought, if only they had labeled it free kittens and kids to boost pickups. You turn a corner, the alley narrowing further, walls pressing in like judgmental neighbors. Flickering torchlight casts elongated shadows, dancing across faded frescoes depicting gods who seem oddly disinterested in the mortal plights below. The air grows cooler, carrying whispers of wind, through the vicoli, and you feel the weight of Rome's layered society, patricians in their hilltop villas, plebeians crammed into multi-story blocks, all interconnected yet divided by these passages. Exposure here isn't random. It's tied to the home's role in forging identity, where the paterfamilias guards the familia's legacy. If a child was deformed, illegitimate, or simply the wrong gender, girls often drew the short straw that threatened that carefully curated image. You imagine the internal debate: keep the heir or risk diluting the bloodline. It's a gentle sarcasm in history's voice, reminding us that for all their engineering marvels, Romans treated family planning like a gladiatorial match. Only the strong survive, or at least the wanted. Pausing by a weathered fountain trickling weakly, you hear the faint coo of another abandoned soul nearby, blending with the distant roar of the Tiber. These alleys alive with the scents of spices from distant provinces and the sounds of nocturnal commerce mask deeper disturbances. A light joke bubbles up. Exposure was Rome's original "it's not you, it's me" breakup, but with diapers involved. Yet beneath the humor, the practice reveals fractures in social bonds, where houses stood as fortresses of identity, their thresholds marking inclusion. You trace a finger along the rough stone, feeling the city's pulse, and wonder at the resilience of those who navigated this world. As dawn hints on the horizon, painting the alleys in soft grays, you reflect on how these streets bore witness to countless such acts, each one a thread in Rome's complex tapestry of power and vulnerability. The practice, embedded in urban life, underscores the domus as more than walls. It's a mirror of societal values, where memory and status dictate who stays within. Another quirky aside: some believed exposed children might return as ghosts, haunting alleys like eternal reminders. Talk about bad parenting karma. You chuckle quietly, the sound echoing softly as you step forward, the city's secrets unfolding further. You step from the alley's edge into the threshold of Roman domus, the heavy wooden door creaking open like a reluctant secret keeper, inviting you into the heart of where these exposures truly begin. It in the streets, but within the walls that define family and fate. The air shifts from the outdoor chill to a warmer, enclosed haze, scented with incense burning low in a bronze brazier and the faint, earthy aroma of terracotta floors still damp from a recent scrubbing. Flickering oil lamps cast golden pools on mosaic patterns depicting ancestral triumphs, and you feel the weight of generations pressing down, as if the house itself breathes with the authority of its inhabitants. Here in this private realm, the paterfamilias reign supreme, his word law in matters of life, death, and everything in between, turning the home into a stage for power plays that echo out to those shadowy alleys. As you move through the vestibulum, the entryway lined with wax masks of stern-faced ancestors staring from alcoves, you sense the rigid hierarchies that structure every corner of this space. The Roman house isn't just a shelter, it's a microcosm of empire, where the father as head wields patria potestas, absolute paternal power over his wife, children, slaves, and even freedmen bound by loyalty. This mainstream historical fact underscores it all. Under Roman law, codified in the 12 Tables, the paterfamilias could legally expose a newborn without repercussion, viewing it as an extension of his property rights, much like deciding to discard a flawed amphora. You pause by a lararium, the household shrine to the gods and spirits, where small offerings of wine and grain sit untouched, and imagine the tension rippling through the family when a birth announcement turns into a verdict session. It's like a twisted family meeting, but instead of debating vacation spots, it's keep or alley. Gentle sarcasm aside, you'd probably opt for our modern baby showers over that drama. You glide into the atrium, the central courtyard open to the sky, where rainwater collects in a shallow impluvium pool, its surface rippling softly under a light drizzle that patters like whispered judgments. Slaves bustle quietly in the background, their tunics whispering against the stone as they carry trays of figs and bread, eyes downcast in deference to the invisible lines of status. Here, the hierarchies sharpen. The paterfamilias, though influential in domestic affairs, defers to her husband on child-rearing decrees. While children Eve accepted Lynn early to navigate this pecking order. You lean against a column, feeling the cool marble against your palm, and picture a new father examining his offspring by lamplight, lifting the infant high in the ritual of Toler Liberum, the act of acknowledgement. If he sets it down without embracing it, the path to exposure is sealed. A quirky tidbit floats in. Some families consulted astrologers or examined birthmarks for omens, believing a mole on the wrong spot could doom a child to the alleys. Like an ancient version of your horoscope says no thanks. The house hums with subdued activity as you wander toward the tablinum, the father's study, piled with scrolls and wax tablets detailing household accounts. The scent of ink and papyrus mingles with the distant clatter of kitchen pots, a reminder that this domain blends intimacy with iron control. Historians still argue whether this paternal dominance stemmed more from economic necessity fighting another mouth and lean times or from cultural ideals of perfect lineage, where imperfections threatened the family's social standing. You can't help but smirk at the modern parallel. Today's dads stressing over college funds, but back then, it was funds or forget it, a light joke to ease the tension. Imagine if Roman fathers had Yelp reviews, great at conquests, 1 star on compassion. Deeper into the peristyle garden, enclosed by colonnades blooming with rosemary and lavender, their fragrances soothing yet undercut by the underlying severity. You observe how these spaces reinforce exclusion. Benches invite quiet reflection. But for the unwanted newborn, there's no seat at this table. The domus design, with its inward focus, shields family secrets from prying eyes, allowing the paterfamilias to orchestrate exposures without public spectacle. Lipping out to the alley under cover of night, you sit on a stone ledge, the trickle of a fountain murmuring like a lullaby, and think of the emotional undercurrents, mothers pleading in hushed tones, slaves averting gazes, all bound by the hierarchies that make dissent risky. Another gentle aside, in this setup, the house feels like a reality show where eviction means the streets talk about high-stakes elimination rounds. As you rise and pace the corridors, shadows lengthening with the fading light filtering through latticed windows, the power dynamics crystallize further. The cubiculum bedrooms, simple yet private, host births in secrecy, midwives attending with herbs and chants, only for the father's decree to overshadow the joy. Slaves, often exposed survivors themselves, might harbor quiet resentments, their own identities forged in the alleys now serving those who perpetuate the cycle. A fringe whisper emerges, tales of exposed infants rescued by wolves or divine intervention, echoing Romulus and Remus, turning tragedy into foundational myth. Quirky, sure, but imagine the family reunions if that happened more often. You circle back to the atrium, the pool now reflecting twilight stars peeking through clouds, and feel the domus pulse with its dual nature, nurturing hearth and unyielding tribunal. The paterfamilias, perhaps reclining on a couch with a goblet of wine, embodies this, his decisions rippling outward to shape social identity. In wealthier homes, frescoes boast lineage trees, omitting the exposed branches, while poorer insulae mimic the dynamic in cramped quarters. You chuckle softly at the ironierum's homes built for eternity, yet so quick to discard the future. The hierarchies here aren't abstract, they're lived, breathed in every glance and gesture, tying back to those alley bundles waiting for dawn's uncertain mercy. Venturing toward the culina kitchen, where the aroma of simmering garum sauce wafts thickly, you witness slaves preparing the evening meal, their conversations laced with caution. The father's authority extends even here, dictating portions and privileges, mirroring his control over new lives. Historians debate if this power waned in later empire periods, influenced by Greek philosophies or rising Christianity, but in the domus core, it remains a fortress of tradition. A modern quip, if only they had family therapy apps back then. Reach your dad's decision, thumbs up or alley dump. As night deepens, lamps guttering low, you linger in the quiet, the house settling into a hush broken only by distant owl calls. These walls, steeped in hierarchies, cradle the seeds of exposure where paternal wind decides destiny, linking the intimate to the impersonal streets beyond. The censer weave cool stones, herbal scents, flickering light straps around you like a blanket of history's gentle sarcasm, urging reflection on power's quiet cruelties. You slip quietly from the kitchen's warm glow into a dimly lit cubiculum at the back of the domus, where the air thickens with anticipation and the faint metallic tang of herbs steeping in a clay bowl nearby. The room is modest, walls adorned with simple frescoes of blooming vines that seem to sway in the lamplight, casting soft, wavering shadows across a low wooden bed draped in woolen blankets. A midwife, her hands calloused and steady, kneels by the bedside, murmuring encouragements in a low, rhythmic cadence that blends with the labored breaths of the woman lying there. Your glimpse into the secretive world of Roman birth, where joy and judgment entwine like the vines on the wall. The night deepens outside, but here time suspends in the hush, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a basin and the distant hoot of an owl, as if the gods themselves are eavesdropping on this pivotal moment. As you hover near the doorway, unseen yet immersed, the birth unfolds in shadows, the mother's face glistening with sweat, under the flicker of a single oil lamp that smells of pressed olives. Slaves attend silently, one fanning with a palm frond to stir the stagnant air, another preparing swaddling cloths woven from coarse linen that scratches softly against your imagined touch. This isn't a public spectacle. Roman deliveries happen in the privacy of the home, often in these secluded chambers, away from the atrium's judgmental ancestors. A mainstream historical fact anchors it. Midwives, known as obstetresses, use tools like the speculum and herbal remedies from plants like sophium to aid labor. Though complications were common in an era without modern medicine, think of it as ancient midwifery meets survival odds. No epidurals in sight. You draw closer, the room's warmth enveloping you like a gentle embrace, scented with the earthy sharpness of rue and myrrh burned to ward off evil spirits. The mother grips the bed's edge, her whispers invoking Juno Lucina, goddess of childbirth, as contractions build like waves on the Tiber. Finally, with a cry that echoes softly against the plastered walls, the newborn emerges tiny, slick, and wailing into the world. The midwife wraps the infant quickly, checking for signs of health, her experienced eyes scanning for deformities or weaknesses that could seal its fate. You feel the tension coil tighter. This bundle, still connected by the cord soon severed with a bronze knife, hangs in limbo between acceptance and the alleys beyond. A light joke to soften the edge. It's like waiting for a delivery app notification. Will it be accepted or returned to sender? The paterfamilias enters now, summoned from his tablinum, his footsteps measured on the mosaic floor that depicts a serene garden scene, ironically peaceful amid the drama. He approaches, tunic slightly rumpled from a long gay, and lifts the child in the ritual gesture, examining it by the lamp's glow that dances across its wrinkled skin. The room falls quieter, breaths held as he decides, raise it as his own or deem it unworthy. This fateful choice, rooted in the house's hierarchies, ties back to those ancestral masks in the vestibulum, guardians of identity, who demand perfection. If the baby is female, or born with a perceived flaw, the odds tilt toward exposure, economic burdens, or lineage purity, often tipping the scale. Historians still argue whether gender bias played the biggest role, with some claiming girls were exposed more frequently to favor male heirs, while others point to broader societal pressures like dowry costs in a status-obsessed culture. You watch as the family huddles, the mother's eyes pleading silently while slaves avert their gazes, knowing their place in this intimate tribunal. The air grows heavier, laced with the newborn's milky scent and the lingering herbs, as the father sets the child down without the full embrace, a signal that sends a ripple through the room. Preparations begin subtly. A slave fetches a simple basket lined with rags, the kind used for market goods, but now repurposed for this grim errand. It's a quirky tidbit that surfaces, Some families marked exposed infants with tokens, like a ring or amulet, hoping for future recognition if the child survived, almost like an ancient Find My Kid tag, though the success rate was probably lower than losing your keys. The cubiculum's confines feel smaller now, walls closing in with the weight of decision. As the midwife cleans up, her tools clinking softly into a basin of water-tinted pink, you lean against the cool plaster, feeling the texture under your fingers, and ponder the sensory overload. Cries softening to whimpers, the lamp smoke curling lazily upward, the faint rustle of cloths being folded. This birth, shrouded in shadows, isn't isolated. It reflects the domus as a cradle of social identity, where the paterfamilias safeguards the family's reputation. If accepted, the child would join rituals in the atrium, named on the 8th or 9th day. If not, the alley awaits under cover of night. A gentle sarcasm whispers, Rome conquered the world but couldn't conquer overpopulation. Without aliases talk about outsourcing family planning. As the group disperses, the father retreating with a heavy sigh, you follow the slave carrying the basket toward the door. The infant's soft coos blending with the night symphony outside. The house settles back into its rhythms, lamps dimming as if to forget the event, but the choice lingers like incense smoke. Another light quip. If this were a modern rom-com, it'd end with a baby montage, not a midnight drop-off. History's plot twists are wilder than fiction. The mother's quiet sobs from the bed add a layer of humanity, reminding you that behind the hierarchies, emotions churned, though suppressed by custom. You step out with the bearer, the cubiculum fading behind, but the shadows of birth cling, leading inexorably to the streets where fate takes over. The domus, with its enclosed world, births not just children but decisions that echo through alleys, tying personal moments to broader societal norms. A fringe echo, legends tell of exposed babies nursed by animals, inspiring tales like that of Rome's founder. Quirky folklore turning tragedy into triumph, or at least good storytelling fodder. The transition to exposure feels seamless now. The baskets wait, a tangible link from shadowed birth to uncertain dawn. You sense the house's pulse slowing, the event absorbed into its walls like so many before, where identity is forged in fire and shadow alike. You emerge from the domus threshold, the heavy door clicking shut behind you like a final punctuation on the birth's shadowed drama, carrying the weight of that simple basket as moonlight filters through the narrow vicus, casting elongated silhouettes on the uneven cobblestones that shift under your cautious steps. The night air nips at your skin, cooler than the house's lingering warmth, laced with the pungent mix of smoldering hearth smoke from neighboring insulae and the faint, briny whiff of the nearby Tiber, as if the river itself mourns the bundle's fate. You follow the cloaked figure, perhaps the father himself, or a trusted slave tasked with this somber duty, down the winding alley, their footsteps muffled by years of trodden dirt, each one echoing the emotional churn bubbling beneath the surface, regret, resolve, and the quiet desperation of a family clinging to its precarious social standing. As you trail closely, the alley envelops you in its dim embrace, walls of weathered brick pressing in like silent witnesses, etched with faded graffiti that whispers forgotten pleas or crude jests from passers-by long gone. The basket sways gently, the infant inside stirring with soft, intermittent whimpers that pierce the hush, a tiny voice protesting the cold injustice unfolding. This act of abandonment, hurried under cover of darkness to avoid prying eyes, ties directly to the domus left behind its walls, a fortress of identity, where the unwanted threaten the carefully curated facade of strength and purity. You feel the turmoil in the bearer's tense shoulders, the internal storm of duty clashing with human instinct, as they scan for a suitable spot, not too exposed to immediate scavengers, yet visible enough for potential rescuers. A mainstream historical fact grounds this Cinnamon law permitted exposure without penalty, viewing newborns as not fully persons until acknowledged, a practice documented in texts like Pliny's Letters, where it served as a grim population control in an empire straining under its own vastness. You pause with them at a crooked junction where two alleys meet, the ground littered with discarded olive pits and shards of amphory that crunch softly underfoot, releasing a faint earthy scent mingled with the night's dew. The figure hesitates, breath visible in the chill, before kneeling to place the basket against a rough stone wall, tucking a fold of cloth over the child as if that small gesture could shield it from the elements or from the guilt gnawing at their core. Emotions swirl like the mist rising from the stones, the mother's distant sobs echoing in memory, the father's stoic mask cracking in private moments, all amplified by the house's hierarchies that demand such sacrifices for the greater familia. You imagine the inner monologue, a whirlwind of justification to many mouths, a deformity unseen but suspected, or simply the wrong timing in a life dictated by auguries and omens. A light joke to lighten the heaviness. It's like decluttering your garage, but with way higher stakes out with the old, or in this case, the brand new. The alley's quiet deepens, broken only by the distant bark of a stray dog or the creak of a shutter opening overhead, where an insular dweller might glance down curiously before retreating. You kneel beside the basket, the infant's wide eyes catching a sliver of moonlight, innocent and unaware, its tiny fingers grasping at air as if seeking the warmth denied. This moment of leaving behind captures the raw turmoil, a family's fracture laid bare in the open yet hidden from society's gaze. Historians still argue whether exposures were more acts of mercy in impoverished households, sparing children from starvation, or calculated culls among the elite to preserve inheritances and avoid diluting bloodlines with imperfections. The sensory details pull you in, cool dampness seeping through your knees, the faint milky warmth rising from the swaddling. The alley's confined echo amplifying every rustle like a confessional whisper. As the bearer straightens, wiping hands on their tunic with a gesture of finality, you sense the reluctance, the backward glance laden with unspoken prayers to Fortuna for a kind fate. They melt back into the shadows toward the domus, leaving you alone with the bundle. The night symphony resuming, when sighing through cracks, a rat skittering nearby. The distant hum of a late-night tavern spilling laughter that feels mocking in contrast. This abandonment isn't abrupt, it's the culmination of housebound decisions, where social identity dictates who belongs within those walls. A quirky tidbit emerges from the fringe. Some exposures included leaving coins or trinkets with the child, not for value, but as talismans against evil spirits, like an ancient good luck charm for the ultimate blind date with destiny. You can't help but smirk softly. If only they had included a note, free to good home bites less than the wolves. The emotional undercurrents linger as you linger, the turmoil palpable in the air thick with unspoken grief. Families didn't always walk away unscathed. Whispers of hauntings or divine retribution circled, tying back to the Lurarian's ignored pleas. You rise slowly, the stones cool against your palms, and follow the retreating figure's path in your mind back to the house where life continues. The vacancy absorbed like a missing tile in the mosaic floor. Another gentle sarcasm. Rome built roads to everywhere but couldn't pave a better path for its tiniest citizens' priorities, right? The alley stretches onward, a vein of vulnerability in the city's grand body, where such acts repeat nightly, each one a thread unraveling the illusion of domestic bliss. Time stretches in the dim light, the infant's cries softening to weary sighs as exhaustion claims it, the basket a fragile cradle amid the debris. You feel the pull of the surrounding insulae, stacked lives peering from windows like judgmental eyes, yet complicit in the custom that binds them all. A modern aside drifts in. We'd call child services today, but back then, it was alley services self-serve edition. The turmoil peaks in this solitude, the abandonment a mirror to the domus's exclusions, where identity is guarded fiercely, outsiders even can cast to the margins. As dawn's first hints gray the sky, painting the alley in subtle shifts, you reflect on the bearer's return home, the door sealing shut on the night's deed. Emotions buried deep like the city's layered ruins. Yet here, in the open wound of the practice, the disturbance resonates, a family's quiet storm left to brew under the stars. You linger in the alley's fading shadows, the abandoned basket a stark reminder of the domeless door now firmly closed. As your gaze lifts to the surrounding hills where grander villas perch like watchful eagles, their terracotta roofs glowing faintly under the emerging stars that prick the velvet sky. The night's chill seeps deeper into your bones, carrying whispers of wind through the vicus, rustling discarded leaves and stirring the faint, acrid scent of distant forges, still cooling from the day's labor. This isn't just one family's quiet tragedy, it's a ripple from broader currents, where social identity presses like an invisible hand, shaping decisions that echo from elite atria to humble hearths, driving the custom of exposure as a tool to safeguard status and lineage in a world where bloodlines are currency and imperfections a liability. As you wander further along the twisting path, the alley widening slightly into a small piazza cluttered with market remnants, wilted greens, and splintered crates emitting a musty decay, you sense the layers of Roman society unfolding around you, each stratum burdened by expectations that filter down to these nocturnal acts. The elite, ensconced in their palatine homes with sprawling gardens and imported marbles, face pressures to maintain unblemished pedigrees, where an extra child or one deemed flawed could dilute inheritances or invite whispers of weakness among peers. You pause by a crumbling fountain, its trickle a soothing murmur against a stone basin etched with lovers' initials, and imagine patricians debating lineages over symposio wine, their togas draped elegantly yet hiding the calculations that lead to alley drop-offs. A mainstream historical fact ties it in. The Lex Appia and later sumptuary laws regulated displays of wealth, but underlying them was a cultural obsession with familial continuity, where exposure helped control family size to preserve estates, as noted in the rigid structures of Roman inheritance under the praetor's edicts. The piazza's edges blur with insulate shadows, multi-story blocks humming with the muffled sounds of families settling in, children's laughter, a lute's plaintive strum. Yet even here, among the plebeians, social identity exerts its pull, mimicking the elite's concerns on a smaller scale. You lean against the fountain's rim, cool water splashing lightly on your fingers, and feel the weight of aspiration. Freedmen striving for respectability, merchants guarding reputations, all wary of burdens that could topple their fragile climb up the social ladder. Lineage isn't just ancestry, it's a shield and a sword in Rome's competitive arena, where exposing a newborn, perhaps illegitimate or sickly, prevents scandals that might erode alliances or business ties. Historians still argue whether this pressure was more acute in urban centers like Rome, amplified by the proximity of judgmental neighbors, or if rural areas saw similar rates driven by agricultural hardships and ancestral land divisions. You step onward, the cobblestones uneven underfoot, leading toward a busier thoroughfare where torchbearers illuminate passing litters carrying the well-to-do, their silk curtains fluttering like secrets half revealed. The air shifts, infused with the spicy aroma of street vendors lingering incense from evening sales, a sensory bridge to the status gains played out in every interaction. For families, the domus serves as a bastion of identity, its architecture from grand impluvium to modest hearths reflecting and reinforcing these pressures, where the unwanted child represents a crack in the facade. A quirky tidbit surfaces amid the stroll. Some Romans believed in the evil eye cursing flawed births, leading to exposures near temples as offerings to avert familial doom, like an ancient superstition. Swap meat, trading babies for blessings. You chuckle softly, the sound lost in the night's breeze. If only they had bumper stickers. Proud parent of an honored lineage, extras not included. The thoroughfare buzzes faintly with late-night foot traffic, slaves hurrying on errands, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies, casting warm glows on faces etched with the day's toils. You weave through, brushing past a group murmuring about the latest games, and ponder how lineage drives the custom deeper. In a society where adoption bolstered political alliances, think Caesar adopting Octavian, natural births carried risks if they didn't fit the narrative. Social status, fluid yet unforgiving, demands conformity. A deformed infant or excess daughter could strain dowries or provoke rivals' mockery, turning the alley into a reluctant reset button. Gentle sarcasm creeps in. Rome, land of laws and legions. Treating kids like beta versions, keep the upgrades. Ditch the bugs. Another light joke. Family trees pruned more aggressively than their olive groves, ensuring only the ripest fruits hang on. As you turn back toward quieter lanes, the stars wheeling overhead in a canopy that feels paternally judgmental. The pressures crystallize in sensory whispers, distant clink of coins in a beggar's bowl, symbolizing economic strains intertwined with status fears. Elite women, confined to spinning wool as symbols of virtue, or the emotional brunt, their identities tied to producing heirs without excess baggage. You imagine villa frescoes boasting heroic ancestors, omitting the exposed shadows, a visual curation of lineage that justifies the harshness. A fringe echo from lore. Tales of exposed nobles' children rising as gladiators or prophets, avenging their abandonment in epic twist-quirky revenge fantasies that probably kept some parents up at night, pondering what if. The lane narrows again, walls closing in with the intimacy of shared secrets, the air cooler and laced with the faint floral hint of night-blooming jasmine climbing a nearby trellis. Social identity's grip feels tangible here, driving abandonments as a safeguard against downward mobility, where even emperors like Augustus enacted laws encouraging births yet tacitly allowed exposures to cull the unfit. You pause, tracing the trellis vines with a finger, their texture rough yet resilient, mirroring family's balancing act. Modern aside, we'd post lineage on social media for likes, but Romans edited theirs with Ali's ultimate unfollow. The custom, woven into status fabrics, reveals a society where houses aren't just homes, but vaults for identity, pressuring choices that linger like echoes in these streets. Deeper into the night, the pressures unfold in layers, from senatorial debates on legacy to plebeian whispers of survival, all fumbling toward those bundles left behind. You feel the cadence slow, the city's pulse sensing with your steps, as lineage's demands paint exposure not as cruelty but necessity, in their eyes a gentle whisper of history's complexities. You drift away from the piazza's lingering echoes, the pressures of status and lineage fading like distant thunder as the alley beckons once more, its narrow confines now stirring with the subtle movements of dawn's early wander, shadow figures emerging from doorways, their cloaks drawn tight against the morning mist that curls lazily over the cobblestones like a veil of uncertainty. The abandoned basket remains nestled against the wall, the infant's soft breaths barely audible above the drip-drip of condensation from overhanging eaves, scented with the damp earthiness of moss clinging to ancient bricks. Strangers pass by, their footsteps a rhythmic patter on the uneven ground, some glancing curiously at the bundle while others hurry on, absorbed in their own dawn errands. This is where fates diverge, where the exposed newborn's future hangs on the whims of rescuers who might claim it, as their owner consign it to a life of servitude in the empire's vast underbelly. As you hover near the basket, the air growing lighter with the sun's tentative rays painting the alley in pale golds, you observe a baker's apprentice pausing mid-stride, his flour-dusted apron fluttering in the breeze, eyes widening at the tiny form wrapped in rags. He kneels, hesitant, fingers brushing the cloth to reveal the child's face, a mix of pity and calculation flickering across his features. Will this be a boon or a burden? In Rome's alleys, rescuers aren't always benevolent saviors. Often they're opportunists seeking free labor, adopting the foundling only to raise it as a slave or apprentice, bound to their household without rights. A mainstream historical fact illuminates this: the practice of alumnus, where exposed children were nourished by finders, often led to enslavement, as Roman law considered them property of the rescuer unless formally adopted, a status shift rare for the lower classes. You feel the tension in the air, thick as the mist, as the apprentice weighs his options, the scent of fresh baked bread from his satchel clashing oddly with the scene's somber tone. The alley comes alive with more figures, A washerwoman balancing a basket of linens on her hip, her calloused hands pausing as she spots the infant, murmuring a quick prayer to the lares before deciding to move on to many mouths at home already. Then comes a merchant, his rings glinting in the light, who scoops up the child with a pragmatic nod, seeing potential profit in rearing it for sale or service. You watch as he tucks the bundle under his arm, the baby's whimpers muffled against his coarse tunic, and heads toward the forum where such finds might be registered or traded discreetly. Futures branch here like the vicus puffs, adoption for the lucky few, into families needing heirs, or more commonly, a slide into slavery, branded with the rescuer's mark, and set to tasks from weaving to mining. Historians still argue whether most exposed infants survived, as adoptees in upwardly mobile homes or perished unseen, with some estimating high mortality but others pointing to population growth fueled by these alley adoptions. Debate rages on the numbers, blurred by scant records. You follow the merchant's retreating form, the alley's walls echoing his steps, textured with graffiti that seems to comment on the moment. Faded words like Fortuna smiles, scratched beside a crude drawing of a child. Sensory details envelop you, the cool mist dampening your skin, the faint cry trailing behind like a ghost, the earthy aroma of wet stone mingling with the distant sizzle of street food vendors firing up their grills. For those rescued, life as an adoptee could mean integration into a new identity, perhaps even citizenship if the adopter was freeborn. But slavery loomed larger, with children trained early in domestic chores or sold at auctions like livestock. A quirky tidbit whispers from the fringes. Some rescuers left exposure markers like distinctive cloths, hoping to reclaim the child later if fortunes improved, almost like a pawn shop ticket for progeny. The redemptions were rarer than comet sightings. You smirk gently, imagine the awkward family reunion. "Hey kid, remember that alley?" "Yeah, about that." Deeper into the morning bustle, the alley feeds into a busier street where carts rumble by, laden with amphorae clinking softly, their olive oil scents wafting strong. You spot another rescuer widow with graying hair pinned under a simple V, lifting a different bundle from a nearby stoop, her expression softening as she coasts softly, seeing a companion for her lonely hearth rather than labor. Adoptees like this might fare better, raised with affection in modest homes, their origins buried under new names and rituals at the family horarium. Yet even here fates twist, girls often funneled into marriage alliances, boys into trades, always carrying the invisible scar of abandonment. Gentle sarcasm drifts in. Rome's welfare system, alley edition, where finders keepers meant lifelong servitude or a shot at the social ladder, no background checks required. A light joke to ease the dawn's gravity. It's like winning the lottery, but the prize is chores for a jackpot. The street pulses with life now, vendors hawking wares with calls that blend into a melodic chaos, the air warming with the sun's climb, and carrying hints of roasting chestnuts from a corner brazier. You observe a group of slaves gossiping by a fountain, their buckets sloshing water that sparkles in the light. One might have been an alley rescue herself, her story a cautionary tale of survival through subjugation. Fates decided in these moments ripple outward, from domestic drudgery in a patrician's villa to gladiatorial arenas for the sturdy one, exposure's lottery spawning the empire's underclass. Another fringe curiosity. Legends of exposed children discovered by nobles, rising to prominence like in Plautus plays, where foundlings become heroic quirky plot devices mirroring rare real escapes from slavery's grip. You chuckle quietly, the sound mingling with the fountain's gurgle, history's fan fiction, turning trash to treasure. As you circle back toward the original alley, the mist dissipating to reveal sharper details, cracks in the walls like veins of time. Rescuers' decisions feel like threads in a vast web, weaving exposed infants into society's fabric as slaves tending gardens or adoptees inheriting shops. The infant from earlier, now carried away, faces an uncertain path, perhaps freedom through manumission later or perpetual bondage, identity reshaped by strangers' hands. Modern aside, we have adoption agencies with paperwork mountains, but Romans kept it street simple, pick and go, no reference is needed. The alley, once a site of abandonment, transforms into a crossroads of chance, where pity, greed, and need collide to seal futures. With the sun higher, casting long shadows that dance across the stones, you reflect on these observers, their choices echoing the domus exclusions, turning vulnerability into opportunity or exploitation. The sensory tape-streaming air, bustling sounds, lingering scents wraps the scene in a sleepy cadence, inviting contemplation on how alleys birthed not just discards, but the resilient undercurrents of Roman life. You wander back through the awakening streets, the merchant's footsteps fading into the morning throng as you turn your gaze upward to the facades of the surrounding domus and insulae, their designs rising like silent sentinels that guard not just inhabitants, but the very essence of exclusion woven into Roman life. The sun's rays slant across terracotta tiles and plastered walls, highlighting the deliberate isolation in every arch and alcove, where houses aren't mere shelters, but architectural statements that mirror and amplify practices like newborn exposure, turning private spaces into fortresses against the unwanted. The air warms gradually, carrying the fresh scent of dew evaporating from stone thresholds mixed with the subtle bitterness of smoke from household altars, as if the buildings themselves exhale the secrets of separation they've held for centuries. As you approach a typical domus, its entrance framed by sturdy columns that seem to bar entry as much as invite it, you feel the pull of its inward-focused layout, designed to shield the familia from the chaotic world beyond while enforcing internal divisions that make exposure a logical extension of the home's logic. The vestibulum greets you first, a liminal space where visitors are vetted before stepping further, its walls lined with those wax ancestral masks that stare down like judges, reminding all who enter of the bloodline's pure tiny deviation, like an imperfect newborn, risks expulsion to maintain that facade. You trace the door's heavy oak panels with your fingers, their grain rough under touch, and sense how this isolation begins at the threshold. Doors bolted at night, windows latticed or high-placed to prevent prying eyes, creating a cocoon where decisions like abandonment can unfold unseen. A mainstream historical fact anchors the design. Roman houses evolved from Etruscan models, emphasizing the atrium as the heart, but always with a focus on privacy, as Vitruvius described in his architectural treatise, prioritizing separation to uphold social hierarchies. Deeper inside you glide into the atrium once more, the open sky above contrasting the enclosed feel, rainwater pooling in the impluvium that reflects fragmented clouds like shattered illusions of openness. Yet even here isolation reigns. Side rooms branch off like guarded chambers, slaves quartered in dim cubicula at the rear, while the paterfamilias commands from the tablinum, his domain a vantage point over the household's comings and goings. This layout reinforces exclusion, where the unwanted infant, deemed a threat to identity, is quietly removed through a back exit to the alley. The house's design facilitating the act without disrupting the central rituals of acceptance. You sit on the impluvium's edge, the cool water lapping gently at the stone, it sound a rhythmic whisper, and imagine births confined to those rear rooms, far from the atrium's public eye, allowing the family to isolate the decision like quarantining a flaw. Historians still argue whether this architectural privacy stemmed more from defensive needs against urban unrest, or from cultural ideals of familial autonomy, with some seeing it as a deliberate tool to enable practices like exposure without societal interference. The peristyle garden unfolds beyond, enclosed by colonnades that create a verdant illusion of freedom, yet bounded on all sides. Herbs like mint and thyme releasing their crisp aromas as you brush past, a sensory veil over the underlying severity. Benches invite repose, but for the exposed, there's no place. The garden's walls, often frescoed with idyllic scenes of nature, mock the harsh reality outside, reinforcing how the domus isolates its core from external vulnerabilities while expelling internal ones. You lean against a column, its fluted surface smooth from years of touch, and ponder the insulae counterpart stacked apartments where isolation manifests vertically. Families crammed in upper floors with shared stairs that echo footsteps like warnings. Exposures slept out 2 alleys below to preserve meager space and status. A quirky tidbit emerges from the design quirks. Some domus featured hidden passages or false walls for smuggling goods, or perhaps pleading a layer of secretive isolation that could aid in discreet abandonments. Like an ancient panic room but for social faux pas. You smirk softly, talk about home fetcher central heating. Nah, but great for hush-hush disposals. Venturing to the upper levels of a nearby insula, the stairs creaking under imagined weight, you enter a cramped apartment where windows overlook the alley. Shutters half closed to filter light and noise, their wooden slats casting striped shadows across simple furnishings. Here, isolation is economic. Walls thin enough to hear neighbors' arguments yet thick with the unspoken rule of minding one's business, allowing exposures to blend into the urban din without communal outcry. The air up here is stuffier, laced with the tang of cooking fires from below, a reminder that these designs multi-story blocks rising like precarious towers amplify exclusion for the masses, where a newborn's cry might disturb tenants, prompting swift removal to maintain fragile peace. Gentle sarcasm whispers, Rome mastered aqueducts for water flow, but family flow straight to the streets if it didn't fit the blueprint. Another light joke, house plans with exposure access as a selling point, prime location, alley views included. Descending back to street level, the facades loom taller, their isolation evident in the lack of front-facing windows, forcing interactions inward and keeping the public at bay, much like how exposure keeps the familiar pure by outsourcing the imperfect. You pause by a grander villa's gate, iron bars cool to the touch, guarded by a slave porter who eyes strangers warily, embodying the architectural barrier that starts at the perimeter. In wealthier homes, elaborate mosaics floor the way, patterns of geometric precision symbolizing order, yet concealing the chaos of decisions that eject the disordered. A fringe architectural note, some houses incorporated underground cellars not just for storage, but rumored for temporary holdings before exposures. Like a basement timeout for the tiniest offender squirky. But imagine the echoes down there. You chuckle quietly, the sound bouncing off the walls, history's blueprints, full of hidden rooms and even more hidden motives. The street curves, leading to a cluster of homes where designs vary by class, yet all share this core of isolation, light with sprawling complexes, poor with huddled rooms, each reinforcing exclusionary practices as naturally as their foundations grip the earth. You feel the sun's warmth fully now, drying the mist and illuminating details, door knockers shaped like lions' heads, roaring silent warnings to outsiders. Social identity thrives in these spaces, houses as extensions of self, where exposure is the ultimate edit, the alley an external editor. Modern aside, we'd renovate for open concepts, but Romans went for closed family vibes, privacy over poplux. As midday approaches, the architecture's role crystallizes, a sleepy cadence in the lights play on stones, inviting reflection on how these designs didn't just house people but shaped their fates, isolating the chosen within while casting shadows outward to the alleys where lives hung in balance. You step away from the imposing facades, the midday sun now high and unyielding, casting a golden haze over the alleys that softens the edges of stone and shadow alike, drawing you into the deeper undercurrents of Roman culture where myths and laws intertwine like vines on a trellis, normalizing the act of exposure as if it were just another thread in the empire's grand tapestry. The warmth seeps into your skin, mingling with the faint, dusty aroma of sun-baked earth rising from the cobblestones, while distant voices from the forum carry snippets of debate and decree, reminding you that this practice didn't sprout in isolation, but was cultivated by stories and statutes that made abandonment feel almost inevitable. As you meander toward the Capitoline Hill, temples looming with their marble columns gleaming white against the azure sky, you sense the cultural scaffolding that propped up these choices, turning personal turmoil into societal norm, where gods and governors alike seem to shrug at the bundles left in the dust. The hill's paths wind upward, flanked by shrines where incense curls lazily from altars, its spicy sweetness blending with the sharper tang of sacrificial smoke, a sensory hymn to the divine justifications that permeated Roman life. Myth played a starring role here, tales spun around hearths, and in theaters that painted exposure not as cruelty but as a heroic gamble, echoing the legend of Romulus and Remus, twin founders exposed by a tyrannical uncle, only to be suckled by a she-wolf and rise to glory. You paused by a statue of the Capitoline wolf, her bronze form weathered yet fierce, pups at her teats symbolizing survival against odds, and imagined families drawing comfort from such stories. If the city's origins sprang from abandonment, surely their own acts carried a touch of destiny. A mainstream historical fact weaves in seamless light. 12 tables, Rome's earliest legal code from around 450 BCE, explicitly allowed the exposure of deformed infants, codifying it as a paternal right to preserve the community's strength, much like pruning a vineyard for better yields. Climbing higher, the path levels at a temple terrace overlooking the sprawling city, where priests in white robes chant softly, their voices a rhythmic drone that lulls like a bedtime incantation, underscoring how religion normalized the practice. Gods like Jupiter and Juno oversaw family matters, but folklore added layers. Parents might invoke Aka Laurentia, the wolf mother figure, in quiet prayers before leaving a child, hoping for similar miraculous intervention. You lean on a balustrade, the stone warm under your palms, etched with votive inscriptions thanking deities for spared lives, and feel the cultural weight. Exposure framed as an offering to fate, not rejection, aligning with auguries where bird flights or entrails dictated decisions. Historians still argue whether these myths serve more as post hoc rationalizations for economic hardships or as genuine moral frameworks, with some claiming they amassed infanticide rates that rivaled modern debates on population ethics. The terrace bustles gently with pilgrims offering libations, wine splashing into bowls with a soft plop, its fruity bouquet wafting on the breeze, a reminder that laws reinforced these narratives, embedding exposure in the legal fabric like mortar and bricks. Emperors issued edicts encouraging births to bolster legions, yet tacitly permitted abandonments, with Constantine later curbing it under Christian influence. But in earlier times, the paterfamilias' authority remained unchecked, laws viewing newborns as extensions of property rather than independent souls. You wandered to a shaded portico, columns casting striped patterns on the ground like bars of judgment, and picture senators in the curia debating family policies, their togas rustling softly, where exposure slipped through as an unspoken clause in inheritance lost to many heirs could fragment estates. So alleys became silent arbitrators. A quirky tidbit bubbles up from the cultural fringes. Some Romans tied exposures to festivals like the Lupercalia, where fertility rites included mock abandonments in plays, blurring lines between ritual and reality like an ancient theater improv gone darkly literal. You chuckle faintly, the sound echoing off the marble. Imagine the reviews, great drama, but the props cried too much. Descending a side path lined with laurel bushes, their leaves whispering in the wind with a dry rustle, you delve into how these justifications permeated daily life, from epic poems recited at banquets to moral tales told to children by flickering lamps. Virgil's Aeneid hinted at foundational sacrifices, while philosophers like Seneca pondered the ethics but often deferred to custom, arguing that nature itself exposed the weak through hardships. The air cools in the shade, carrying hints of pine resin from nearby groves, a soothing balm over the underlying harshness, as you reflect on laws like the Lex Julia et Poppaea Poppaea, which penalized the childless yet overlooked the exposed, prioritizing quantity over quality in the empire's demographic chess game. Gentle sarcasm drifts in. Rome conquered barbarians, but let myths babysit their ethics. Talk about divine daycare. Another light joke, laws so flexible, They bent like aqueduct arches, channeling unwanted lives straight to the streets. The path opens to a quieter grove, sacred oaks arching overhead, their acorns crunching underfoot like tiny omens, where cultural whispers grew louder, superstitions claiming exposed children appeased underworld spirits, preventing household curses, or that dreams foretold which births to relinquish. You sit on a fallen log, its bark textured and mossy, soft against your touch, and sense the normalization at work in a society where slaves outnumbered citizens in some quarters. Exposure fed the system, laws winking at rescuers who claimed foundlings as property, turning tragedy into transaction. From the fringes comes a tale of the striga, witch-like figures said to snatch exposed infants for potions. A spooky folklore that perhaps deterred some abandonments or justified others, as preemptive strikes, quirky horror stories serving as cultural caution tape. You smirk sleepily. If only they had Ghostbusters instead. Who you gonna call? Alley Avengers. Rising as the sun dips slightly, casting longer shadows that dance like elusive truths, you continue through the grove. The cultural justifications crystallizing like dew on leaves. Myths romanticize survival, laws legalize discretion, all cushioning the emotional blow while tying back to the domus as a microcosm of empire where identity demanded sacrifices. Modern aside, we'd have therapy sessions for this, but Romans opted for epic poems cheaper than counseling, I guess. The sensory lull of rustling foliage, warming earth scents, distant chants wraps you in a dreamy haze, pondering how these elements made exposure not aberration but alignment with cosmic order. Venturing toward the forum's edge, the crowd's murmur growing like a waking dream, you uncover more layers. Imperial propaganda lauding large families yet ignoring the cause, with poets like Ovid weaving exposure into love stories as poignant twists. The air buzzes with vendor calls, spices, and bread aromas teasing a lively contrast to the grave undertones, where scholarly debates linger on whether Christian shifts truly ended the practice or merely drove it underground. Yet in this era, myths and laws stood as pillars, normalizing what alleys bore witness to, a gentle cadence in history's voice urging understanding over judgment. You descend from the Capitoline sacred heights, the forum's clamor softening behind you like a receding wave as your path veers toward the Appian Way, that ancient ribbon of stone stretching southward, inviting you to venture beyond Rome's marble heart into the vast provinces where the empire's edges blur with local flavors, altering the grim custom of exposure in ways that reflect hybridized identities far from the Tiberias banks. The road unfurls under your sandals, dust kicking up in fine clouds that carry the earthy scent of parched soil mingled with wild thyme blooming along the verges, while distant olive groves shimmer in the afternoon heat, their silver leaves rustling like whispered adaptations of Roman ways. Here, away from the city's tight alleys, the practice shifts shape, molded by provincial cultures that blend imperial edicts with indigenous traditions, turning abandonment into a mosaic of regional variations where social identity wears a different mask. As you trek onward, the landscape opens to rolling hills dotted with farmsteads, their thatched roofs a humble contrast to urban domus, and you sense how exposure in these outlying lands wasn't a uniform echo of Rome but a refracted custom, influenced by local economies and beliefs that softened or sharpened its edges. In places like Gaul or Hispania, where Celtic roots lingered beneath Roman rule, families might expose infants, not just for lineage purity but to appease ancient earth spirits, leaving bundles near sacred groves rather than urban alleys, hoping druidic echoes would guide rescuers with kinder hands. You pause by a roadside milestone, its inscribed distances worn smooth by countless travelers, and feel the sun's warmth baking the stone, a gentle reminder that provincial homes, villas with sprawling courtyards or rustic casas served as crucibles for these changes, their designs incorporating local elements like open hearths that fostered communal decisions over solitary paternal decrees. A mainstream historical fact grounds this shift. In Egypt under Roman control, Papyri records from Oxyrhynchus reveal exposures often tied to Nile flood cycles, where economic strains from poor harvests prompted abandonments, but with a twist. Many were left at temples dedicated to Isis, blending Roman law with pharaonic traditions of divine adoption. The road curves through a vineyard, vines heavy with ripening grapes that release a sweet, fermenting aroma as you brush past, their tendrils curling like cultural entwinements that illustrate how identities altered the practice. In Syria or Asia Minor, where Greek influences persisted, exposure might incorporate philosophical debates from Plato's ideals of eugenics, leading wealthier Hellenized families to select for superior traits more rigorously, while poorer ones adapted by fostering foundlings into extended kin networks, blurring lines between slave and adoptee in ways Rome's rigid hierarchies rarely allowed. You imagine a provincial domus here, its atrium fused with a Persian-style garden, fountains trickling softly in a hypnotic rhythm that soothes the day's heat, where the paterfamilias consults not just ancestors but local oracles before deciding. The air thick with incense from eastern spices that mask the underlying turmoil. Historians still argue whether these variations reduced overall exposure rates in provinces, with some claiming cultural syncretism offered more merciful alternatives like informal adoptions, while others point to archaeological evidence of higher infant burials suggesting the practice intensified under imperial taxes that strained rural identities. Further along, the path dips into a valley where a small settlement clusters around a forum replica, scaled down yet bustling with merchants hawking wares from Afar silks from the east, pottery from Africa. There calls a melodic babble that underscores the empire's diversity. In North African provinces like Carthage's remnants, Punic echoes might transform exposure into ritual offerings at Tophet sites, where infants were left near old sacrificial grounds. Rescuers, often Berber tribesmen who raised them as herders, forging identities tied to the land rather than bloodlines. You sit on a low wall overlooking the scene, the stone rough and sun-warmed against your skin, bees humming lazily around flowering cacti that prick the air with a faint, thorny scent, and ponder how these alterations reflected resistance or assimilation. British tribes in the north, with their woad-painted warriors, perhaps exposed fewer girls, valuing them in matrilineal traces that clashed with Roman patriarchy, turning alleys into forested clearings where druids whispered protections, a quirky tidbit from the fringe's surfaces. In Dacia, folklore spoke of exposed children guarded by wolf spirits akin to Rome's founders. But with a twist, locals believed they gained shape-shifting powers, becoming guardians of mines, a mythical upgrade from alley scraps to supernatural miners. You chuckle softly, the sound blending with the wind. Imagine the resumed skills, howling, gold-digging. Literal edition. The settlement's edges give way to open fields, wheat swaying in golden waves that rustle like pages of unwritten histories, carrying the dry, grassy perfume of harvest time as you continue your journey. Provincial identities, forged in the crucible of conquest, often softened Rome's harshness. In Judea, Jewish laws against exposure clashed with imperial norms, leading to hidden resistances where communities secretly rescued and raised the abandoned, weaving them into tight-knit clans that preserved cultural continuity against the domus's isolating walls. Yet in harsher frontiers like Germania, the practice might harden, with exposures left in riverbanks to return to nature gods, rescuers scarce amid tribal wars, fates more feral than urban. Gentle sarcasm murmurs, Rome exported aqueducts and amphitheaters, but exposure got a local makeover like franchising a grin tradition with regional specials. Another light joke, in the provinces, it was less when in Rome and more when in Gaul, at a druid twist cultural fusion cuisine, minus the appetizing part. As evening approaches, the sky softening to hues of lavender and rose, you crest a hill overlooking a distant sea, waves lapping rhythmically against rocky shores in a lulling cadence that echoes the adaptation's ebb and flow. In maritime provinces like Greece's islands, exposure might involve seaside drop-offs, Myths of Poseidon claiming the worthy blending with Roman fortuna. Rescuers, fishermen who saw foundlings as gifts from the deep, their identities salted with nautical lore. You feel the breeze off the water, cool and briny, tussling your hair like a gentle tease, and reflect on how these variations tied back to core themes, houses in provinces, often hybrid structures with local thatch over Roman foundations, mirrored this, their thresholds more porous to community input, altering the solitary alley acts into collective rituals. A modern aside drifts in. We'd call it cultural appropriation today, but back then, it was just empire building expedition. With provincial DLC, the road stretches onward under twilight's veil, stars emerging like provincial lights in Rome's shadow, each variation a testament to identities reshaping the custom. From merciful integrations to stark amplifications, you sense the landscape's pulse slowing, the censer-weaved dusty paths, herbal airs, distant waves wrapping you in a dreamy contemplation of how far from Rome's alleys the practice wandered. Yet always linked by the empire's unyielding thread, you amble back toward the heart of Rome, the provincial roads dissolving into familiar urban sprawl as twilight deepens, the sky a canvas of deepening indigos streaked with the last embers of sunset, urging you to reflect on the lingering shadows of newborn exposure, a custom that didn't vanish with the empire's fall but echoed through centuries, shaping laws, morals, and even modern whispers about life's value in the cradle of civilization. The air cools subtly, carrying the faint, metallic tang of the Tiberias waters lapping against ancient quays, mixed with the woody smoke from evening braziers flickering in doorways, as if the city itself exhales memories of those allied bundles, their fates woven into the fabric of history's enduring tapestry. You pause by the forum's ruined stones worn smooth by time's relentless tread, and feel the weight of legacy. This practice, once normalized in the domus's isolated chambers, influenced the rise of Christianity, which condemned it as pagan barbarity, leading emperors like Constantine to enact bans that rippled into medieval codes, transforming abandonment from family prerogative to societal sin. As you sit on a weathered marble bench, the cool surface seeping through your tunic like a gentle reminder of impermanence, you ponder how exposure's impact stretched beyond Rome's walls, seeding ethical debates that bloomed in Renaissance treatises and Enlightenment philosophies, where thinkers like Locke railed against infanticide as a violation of natural rights, echoing Roman paternal power but flipping it toward child protection. The sensory hush envelops youth, distant coo of pigeons nesting in arches, the soft rustle of leaves from a nearby sacred grove inviting contemplation on how this custom underscored social identity's fragility. Houses as battlegrounds for legacy, where the unwanted were excised to preserve the line, a mindset that lingered in later European poor laws allowing foundling wheels at churches, anonymous drop-offs that softened but didn't erase the alley's chill. A mainstream historical fact crystallizes here. By the 4th century AD, laws under Valentinian made exposure a capital offense, marking a shift from tolerance to prohibition as Christian values permeated the empire, though enforcement varied like the province's adaptations you wandered through. The forum's grandeur fades in the gloaming, torches igniting along pots with pops, and hisses that dance like fireflies, illuminating graffiti from antiquity that might have lamented lost children. And you delve into the ongoing scholarly tussles, where experts sift through bones and texts to gauge just how prevalent this was. Historians still argue whether exposure was a daily grim routine across the empire, with some estimating thousands annually based on legal mentions and literary allusions, while others, scrutinizing archaeological digs, contend the evidence for widespread infanticide is overstated, pointing to infant burials that suggest natural deaths more than deliberate cause. No clear bias against girls or the disabled in the skeletal records. You trace a finger along the bench's carvings, feeling the grooves like timelines of debate, and smirk at the ironerum, master of censuses and conquests, left fuzzy stats on its tiniest casualties. forcing modern sleuths to play detective with pottery shards and papyri. Venturing toward the Palatine silhouette, the hill rising like a sentinel of faded glory, the air thickens with the aroma of roasting chestnuts from a street vendor's cart, a comforting warmth against the night's encroaching cool. The legacy endures in subtle ways, influencing bioethics today, where discussions on reproductive choices hark back to those paternal verdicts. Or, in literature like Dickens' tales of orphans that romanticize survival from abandonment's brink, you imagine the domus evolving into medieval manors, their halls still echoing hierarchies that valued heirs over extras, exposures ghost-haunting welfare systems that emerged to catch the fallen. A quirky tidbit floats in from the fringes. Some late antique tales claimed exposed infants were spirited away by fairies or demons, evolving into European folklore where changelings replaced unwanted babies, almost like Rome's myths upgrading to medieval fantasy, with wolves swapped for woodland sprites. Gentle sarcasm creeps in. The empire fell, but its baby-ditching habit got a glow-up in fairy tales talk about rebranding tragedy. The path winds through quieter quarters, lamps guttering low in windows like sleepy eyes, casting golden pools on cobblestones that click softly underfoot. And you chuckle at a light parallel. If Romans had reality TV, it'd be Survivor, Alley Edition, with exposure as the ultimate photo-op, legacies built on who made the cut. Yet the debates rage on, scholars poring over villa excavations where infant remains mingle with household trash, arguing if this points to callous disposal or ritual burials masking deeper cares. Prevalence tied to economic slumps or cultural norms that viewed newborns as probationary until named. Another quick bubbles up, historians bickering over bones like family at a Will Reddingwell's legacy gets the lion's share. The impact lingers in global child rights, UN conventions tracing lines back to those alley acts, urging protections that Rome's paterfamilias would scoff at. As full night cloaks the city, stars pricking the velvet dome like forgotten amulets, you reflect on how this custom's shadow touches even now. In adoption laws that echo rescuers' claims or debates on gender selection that mirror ancient biases, though archaeology tempers claims of rampant female exposure with balanced skeletal sex ratios, you lean against a column, its fluted stone cool and steady, the wind sighing through like a historian's sigh over unresolved questions. Was it epidemic or episodic, mercy or murder? The sensory fatteth dimming lights, hushed streets, faint river murmur draws you into peaceful musing, the enduring scar on social identity a reminder that houses, whether Roman or modern, still shape who belongs. Deeper into the quiet, the legacy unfolds in cultural memory, from operas dramatizing foundlings to novels exploring abandoned origins, each a nod to those bundles and certain puffs. You wander on, the air velvet soft, pondering how Christianity's triumph buried the practice, but not its lessons, emperors' edicts evolving into humanitarian norms that safeguard the vulnerable. A final quirky aside, medieval chroniclers spun yarns of holy men raised from exposures, saintly legacies from alley starts like divine career boosts for the discarded. You smile drowsily, history's gentle sarcasm whispering that Rome's greatest export wasn't roads, but reflections on human worth, debates eternal as the eternal city itself. As the stars wheel slowly overhead, their soft twinkles like distant lullabies, you feel the night's embrace growing gentler. The city's ancient stones settling into a profound hush that cradles your wandering thoughts. The echoes of those alley cries fade into whispers, carried away on the Tibier's murmuring flow, leaving behind a serene tapestry of history's lessons, woven with threads of resilience and quiet transformation. No more the sharp edges of paternal decrees or the chill of shadowed streets. Instead, a warming glow of understanding settles in, reminding you that from such dark customs emerge brighter paths, compassionate laws, cherished narratives, and a deeper appreciation for the fragile spark of new life. Let the weight of Rome's legacies lift now, drifting like mist at dawn, as your mind eases into peaceful repose, visions of grand domus and winding vicus blurring into dreamlike haze. Breathe deeply, the air soft and scented with faint night plumes, each inhalation drawing you further from the disturbances of the past toward the calm harbor of slumber. The empire's stories, once vivid and stirring, now soften to faint murmurs, guiding you gently toward restful oblivion, where all debates dissolve into silence, and only tranquility remains. Sweet dreams await, wrapped in the velvet cloak of time's forgiving forgetfulness, as you surrender to the night's tender hold.